invisible barrier after the second row. I'm Nadine Stafford. I'm a member of the Interfaith Coalition for Public Education. I want to welcome you all and thank you for being here, and I especially want to welcome back the people who are at our first forum. The Interfaith Coalition is an independent, all-volunteer, grassroots network committed to community involvement in improving the quality of public education here in Santa Fe. You can recognize coalition members tonight. Most of us are wearing blue, some kind of blue, but if coalition members, if you raise your hand so people can recognize you later. On behalf of the coalition, thank you for coming to this second of 3 forums on the topic, Our Schools, What Does It Take? I especially want to thank our moderator, our panelists, and Rebecca Estrada from the HEC here for volunteering their time to be here. In addition, the Interfaith Coalition is grateful for the premier sponsorship and exceptional support of the Santa Fe New Mexican, and our co-presenter, Santa Fe Higher Education Center, as well as our partners, Communities and Schools of New Mexico, First Presbyterian Church of Santa Fe Area Home Builders Association, Santa Fe Association of Realtors, Santa Fe Chamber of Commerce, Santa Fe Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Santa Fe chapter of NAACP, and Temple Beth Shalom. Tonight, our time together will be divided into 2 main parts. You have a yellow agenda on your seat, as well as a white index card and a pencil. So in the first part, our moderator, Simon Simonich, who is the Assistant City and Weekend Editor at the Santa Fe New Mexican, and our panelists will address tonight's question, which is, what does it take to evaluate student progress? While they're talking, we hope you will use the index cards provided to write down your questions for the panel. If you raise your hand or just wave your card, a coalition member will come and collect your card. And then questions will be used at the end of the panelist remarks for a 10-minute question and answer session. In the second part, we're going to form small groups among ourselves so that we can discuss what we've heard from the panel. Coming from the discussion in these small groups, each group will write at least one possible community action on a yellow index card you'll be given later, and someone from your group will be the appointed person to come up and report out on your action. As we transition from part 1 to part 2, I'll repeat what we're going to do. So I'm pleased now to give the floor to Rebecca Estrada, who's the Executive Director of the Higher Education Center for Santa Fe Community College.
Well, thank you so much. Let me just welcome you this evening, not only because you braved the weather, but because, of course, it's an incredibly important conversation, so we're so glad to have you here. I want to particularly welcome you to this facility. For those of you who were here before, for those of you who haven't been here before, it seems only appropriate that this conversation would happen in this building. Not only is it a, physical example of one of the possibilities that the students whom we are trying to affect in this room tonight, a goal they can achieve, but it is also a testament to what community voice can bring. This building, for those of you who don't know the history, it was fully bond funded, everything in it. The voters made us the stewards of this facility and the partnerships. Basically, this whole endeavor began because community came to the administration at the time of Santa Fe Community College, to business leaders, to city and state leaders, and said, this is a need. Affordable bachelor's and master's degrees in Santa Fe in certain workforce areas. And through various discussions and community forums and data gathering, we got this. So it's about partnership, it's about realizing what the community's needs are, it's about having all the voices at the table and being able to figure out how to really find solutions as a community and not siloed, because we're all serving the same people, which are not just the citizens of Santa Fe, but the students of Santa Fe. So thank you so much for being a part of this endeavor, this adventure. Thank you for being here in this building, and we hope that all that sort of good mojo that goes with partnership and community building and outreach I think we're going to have some real initiatives that come out of this, real possibilities. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rebecca. And now I'd like to give the floor to Lila.
Thank you all for coming out on this raw and misty night, and I also want to thank everyone who is watching this being webcast on the New Mexican website. Education is the ticket to success. We all know that. The panelists will help spread that message, and we'll see where the conversation goes. I'm happy to introduce our panelists. I'll just do it in the order you have it on your sheets, because it makes it a little easier. Dr. Richard Bowman, Santa Fe Public Schools. He's a data specialist. Richard. Tony Grillage, who I asked him about this. He said it is a correct title, principal learner, because he feels like he learns the most, and teacher at the Mandela International Magnet School. Don Wink, Don, interim director, teacher education department, Santa Fe Community College. Gitya Holdsworth, interim principal and teacher, Santa Fe School for the Arts and Sciences. And Bernice Garcia, counselor, Aspen Magnet School, Santa Fe Public Schools. We thought it'd be easiest just to go in this order, so Dr. Bowman, if you'd like to start, please do.
Thank you. So when I was asked to be on this panel, what does it take, and answer the question, what does it take to evaluate student progress, I thought long and hard about what to talk about. There's certainly been a lot of comments back and forth and concerns and angst expressed about a lot of the things that are going on in the area of accountability, assessment, standardized testing, and that sort of thing. But then I looked at a little further at the little blurb that we saw, and saw the part where it said, let's go ahead and answer that question. So what I want to do is actually dive a little bit more into that question. As Elon mentioned, I'm a data specialist, and to use my research background and unpack what that means. What does it take to evaluate student progress? First thing I wanted to talk about is the last part of that. We're talking here about student progress, and I wanted to draw a comparison and a contrast between progress and performance. Measuring performance is one thing, that's kind of one point in time, but as soon as we talk about the word progress, you're talking about how do you look at things over time to see how things are going. The next piece of that I'd like to dive into is evaluate versus assess. And I think we know about assessments. To assess kind of means to measure. Evaluate is actually drawing a conclusion from many assessments. In education, assessment happens all the time. In the teachers in the classroom, the light bulb moments, the tests, the quizzes, the bell ringers, and that sort of thing. But it also includes what we call standardized testing, which are state-mandated, by law assessments. And I did want to draw us a tiny bit away from the legally mandated assessments and talk a little bit more about the assessments that really guide instruction in the classroom. What that means is that assessment is about teachers being able to measure how their kids are doing. And where I wanted to take this one in terms of evaluate, to link that with the historical nature of this assessment and draw everyone's attention to what's happening in the past, which is that previous assessments are somewhat lost. Children go into a new teacher's classroom, that teacher sort of starts that relationship fresh. oftentimes without a lot of information about what's been going on before with that child. What does it take? We need to provide our teachers with access to those previous assessments so they can put them together and make an evaluation of how well the students are doing. Education in our entire country and our society has moved from the industrial age and the industrial era, the industrial revolution, to the information age. Technology, information, it is how the economy runs, it is how things get built, it is where the advances are. And indeed, education should be the sector of the economy that is pushing that forward. What is education, but also providing our children with the ability to go out and research and discover new sources of information. What we're doing here in Santa Fe is helping our school district enter that information age. We've developed a digital learning plan. This digital learning plan, it will provide robust information infrastructure. It will provide the right devices and tools. And also we're providing our teachers here training on how to use those tools. Some of the things we've already done, we've begun building up that infrastructure, upgrading our bandwidth, expanding our wireless. We provided more of our students with devices that enable them to access the internet, which has more information at your fingertips than I ever had when I was in school. The other piece that we've done is actually hiring our digital learning coaches. And what those people are doing is going out and helping all of our teachers who've been teaching, have a lot of experience teaching, and getting that information and that new knowledge over to our students, and helping them use these new tools to, use the new tools to access and acquire new information. When we put all this together, the answer to that question, what does it take to evaluate student progress? What we need to do is put together a system where we can take those historical assessments, put them all together into a simple, easy-to-use dashboard or a simple, easy-to-use format for our teachers, and teach them how to use that information so each individual teacher can talk to the students in their classroom and help those particular students achieve their potential. And the last one, is there too much testing? I would like to not answer that question.
Next we have Tony Grillage.
I think I'm okay without the microphone. Thank you, Ilan, and thank you to the Interfaith Coalition for organizing this set of panel discussions. I was asked to actually comment on the international perspective on this question of what does it take to evaluate student progress, having returned recently from being the director of the American School in Warsaw, Poland, where I was for 4 years. And it's a great question to ask because there are some truly great stories out there. The most interesting one is, of course, Finland, which 40 years ago was at the bottom of the pile in any kind of international assessments, and 40 years later is at the top of the pile in all of the international assessments. So it begs the question, how'd they do that? And it's interesting. And of course, Finland is not the United States. People have tried to draw parallels. You can't really draw the parallels, but we certainly can take away a few lessons. What Finland did 40 years ago is what I think we ought to be doing, and asking the question, why are we doing this? Why have we set up this massive system of standardized testing across the United States? Is it working? So in thinking about that question, I think we have one of three options. They're all related, of course, but one, has there been a serious concern about the decline of fundamental basic skills in the United States? That's one. So we could solve that by setting up a series of standardized tests to test reading and math, and let's address that problem. Is there a serious worry about the decline of America's state in the world as other countries are passing us by on these international assessments? A legitimate concern as well. And are we trying to educate or equip our kids with the skills that they're going to need to function well in the future? All those three are great questions for why are we doing this. Here's how Finland did it. First of all, they completely revamped their teacher education system. They got rid of most of their teacher education colleges, kept about half a dozen of the elite colleges, made the entrance requirements significant to get in, trained their workforce excellently, did not raise their salaries significantly. Finnish teachers make slightly more than the US, but not significantly. And once they graduated, they turned over the autonomy of how the national standards were to be implemented to the teachers, to the professionals who were then highly educated. Is there standardized testing in Finland? Yes, one at the end of high school. And it's a rigorous test. It's a 3-day test. It's a very high stakes test. On that test, kids decide what, or they get mandated where to go to college. 3 years into their high school program, they get funneled either into a college track or into a vocational track that is also extremely well funded and extremely technologically oriented. And sometimes it's hard to tell which track those students are on. The other significant thing that the Finns did, which I think bears some lessons for us, is that they use all of their assessments for diagnostic purposes. None of it is punitive. None of it is to give incentives. The theory of action that we have in the United States is that we have external measures, these standardized tests. We either are going to punish teachers or we're going to incentivize them one way or the other. This is a great book by Daniel Pink that many of you will know called Drive. It says that if you want to incentivize factory workers, that'll work. Make widgets and that'll work if you pay them more. In creative industries, it's never been shown to work. And yet that's a little bit about what we've done. The international assessments that Finland comes out on top is called PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. It is a test that's given every 3 years to 75 countries, the top 75 economies in the world. It's a sampling of students around those countries. It's not content-based, but it's a test that determines the student's ability to apply content to real-world situations. That's where the US has dropped in 2012, our most recent stats, from 2009, where we were about average, slightly above, slightly below. Now we're below average in math, reading, and science in 2012 on the PISA exam. Interestingly enough, Linda Darling-Hammond, the researcher and professor of education from Stanford and formerly at Teachers College, did an analysis of that PISA exam. She took all the American schools that had 10% poverty or less, looked at those schools, they're number 1 in the world relative to other countries. Then 25% poverty level, they're number 2. We are number 2 and 3 in the world on that PISA exam. 50% poverty, 75% poverty, and we sink like a stone. What Finland did was realize 40 years ago they had to have a massive infusion of resources and efforts in preschool education, in social safety nets in their society. In other words, they took a very holistic approach to solving this problem. We don't. We lay it at the feet of the teachers and say, fix it, while all of this other stuff is going on. Finally, are there alternatives to standardized testing? And this is too short an evening to get into it, but I highly recommend this book called The Test by Anya Kamenetz. She's the NPR education reporter. Why our schools are obsessed with standardized testings, but you don't have to be. She has some very thoughtful suggestions. Why don't we sample in this country, like the PISA test does, like the National Association of Educational Progress? Why do we have to do it so often, all the time? Why does it have to be punitive? Why do we have to have incentives? That's shown not to be so effective. And there are many other very interesting things happening around the country. There is a new assessment called the College Work Readiness Assessment Tool that's gaining more and more traction that assesses problem solving, critical thinking, application, sort of the things that the PISA exam analyzes. Lastly, and this is my last comment, why are we doing this? Is it to equip our children to occupy this dynamic economy that is coming on the scene? And here's a great book I'd recommend as well. Laszlo Bock, the HR director for Google. And this is Work Rules. So before Laszlo Bock came on the scene, Google used to hire Ivy League graduates with the highest test scores imaginable and pages of references, et cetera, et cetera. Laszlo Bock did some research and says, well, that's not doing anything to help us at Google. And they no longer do that. It does not work for Google. Since Laszlo Bock, 15% of all Google hires don't even have a college degree. They have set up their own assessment system, their own interview system. They're interested in what students can do, not necessarily what they know. And that is the way that we need to go. So I'm sorry I don't have a real concrete answer for what does it take to evaluate student progress, but I wish we'd spend a little more time saying, why are we doing this? Maybe we'd get a little more clarity. Thanks.
It would be great to be in your class, Tony. That was very thorough and very thought-provoking. Thank you. Next up, we have the community college perspective from Don Wing. Don?
I'm so glad we get to stand up, because I don't speak and sit well together, so thank you for that, Tony. This morning, and I wanted to thank the Interfaith Coalition for asking me to participate in this discussion, especially since our family has not been to church in months. And thank you so much. And I promise we've been so busy, and I promise we'll be back. So it's really great to see you here. And as I was sitting this morning thinking about the two questions that the panelists received, it was, is there, and the rain was falling outside, and what would I didn't realize it was going to become a deluge. I feel like we should have walked in 2 by 2 by the time we came out here today. But I was watching the rain fall, and the two questions we received is there too much testing, and how do we bring accountability and evaluation into learning? And I knew I only had 5 minutes for the first, thank you, Lisa, for the first little bit. So is there too much testing? That's easy, yes. That I can put on this little teeny tiny card. The last research that I read about how much time now is being spent in classrooms and testing is 6 weeks. Our kids are losing 6 weeks to sitting in front of computers, in Minnesota with the standardized testing that they give out, they also include instructions what happens if your students throw up during this test. And so this is something that I absolutely unequivocally feel yes, because that's time they're not reading, that's time they're not learning, that's time they're not thinking critically, that's time lost. And so much of those standardized tests, which is a whole other discussion, is not based in pedagogy but based in profit. And so I encourage anybody who has not looked into that to kind of look that up and check out what's going on there. But I've sat in so many meetings where we were talking about student learning, and the conversation somehow was focusing on data points. And again, I've sat in these meetings and we're talking about students, and all of a sudden, and I realized, lately I was sitting and it was a sea of dots up above me, and it was talking about data points. And all I could think is I was looking at these dots and I thought, kids are not data points. Teachers are not data points. And I was looking at, and there was this beautiful PowerPoint of red and green and blue, and it was glossy. And I was looking at that little red dot, and I thought, that kid's parents walked up from Mexico in order to give them a better life. And how in the world is that going to be reflected in that data point? And that little green data point, that kid went home and there's no food at home. And it's really hard to learn and do well on tests if you're really hungry. And so I was so thrilled to be asked to participate in this discussion, because I hope that we will move beyond that idea that people are data points when we're talking about evaluation and we're talking about learning, because that's what this conversation has been reduced to nationally and in this state. Data is a wonderful tool to inform how to better serve students. And there are people in this room who know how to do it really, really, really well. And she's wearing a purple scarf right now. And so I hope that we will, when we're thinking about data, we're thinking about how does this inform us? And it doesn't, again, get confused with human beings. I forget how much time I have. There she is. So then we're asked, well, okay, so what can we do instead? We can, and as Tony said, I was going to bring up Finland, so I'm so glad. I was going to talk about Finland as well, and one of the things, because we get compared to Finland all the time, and what gets lost in the translation is Finland has 4% poverty now because they addressed all of these issues, and we have 40% poverty. But it's much easier to blame teachers than it is to address poverty. And so I hope as we're talking about this conversation that we won't lose sight of that. Evaluation and learning embraces the whole child. It embraces all the complexity that comes with it, but it embraces those life stories. It embraces, if they come to school speaking languages other than English, let's evaluate them in a language they understand. Because if I had to go, if I was evaluated in Russian right now, I probably wouldn't do very well. And the teacher whose class I was in would get dinged because I didn't do very well. And so what do those specifics look like? Tony mentioned the idea of sampling. He mentioned the idea of looking at over time. It's, you know, some people take tests really well and some people don't. Well, what if we evaluate based on that whole human being instead of this one little tiny bit of time that oftentimes people are really nervous about, or maybe they're hungry for, or maybe something happened in their home in that morning. And I think my time is up. So I thank you for this because it has been a very reductive conversation nationally and in our state, and I look forward to a very expansive conversation tonight.
Thank you, Dawn. You did have a little more time if you needed to get it last
I'll
on.
take it later.
Okay. All right, next up, the combination teacher principal, Gitya Holdsworth Eva.
I'm going to sit and I'm going to use the microphone. It was a rainy day. We didn't have recess today, so I'm tired and I think I've lost my voice. And I'm glad to see on such a cold day and it's rainy that we're here to have this really important conversation about kids and learning. So many things that Richard and Tony and Dawn have said, you probably saw me going, yeah, what he said, what she said, because there's such a wide range of truth around students and learning and evaluation and performance and progress, and it's all there, but I have a very short time to be on my soapbox. So, you know, the question is there too much testing, and how do we bring accountability and evaluation into students? Yeah. You know, and I have the benefit of being in an independent school that gives me as a school leader a certain range of choice. And I appreciate having a range of choice because I get to, with the teachers, play a game of what is best practice? What is at the heart of good education for students? And I do know that as an educator, I am accountable. Our teachers are accountable. The big question is not just, why are we doing this? But to whom are we accountable? What is the purpose of giving students an education? Sometimes our quest for accountability, I think, gets stalled when we forget who we're doing this for. You know, that the protagonists of the story are the students, their families, and the teachers that teach them. And sometimes, all of a sudden, something else takes us off track. So, you know, a student brings like this range of developmental manifestations from kindergarten through 12th grade. And we as teachers are the beneficiaries of that. And we interact with them. There's a lot of discussion about standards and data and accountability tied into student evaluation. And standards are important. They do give us a trajectory. They're like a roadmap for teachers and students to know where do I start and where am I going. And it's important. We need to know where we are. What is our trajectory? But on a really integral level, I think the piece that really, really deserves just as much attention as data and objective evaluation is the fact that learning is an affective process. Anyone who's been around children knows that learning is not a straightforward path, that the strategies you came in with that morning are not the ones I'm going to use 2 hours later or 10 minutes later, because I'm constantly gauging where are kids, what are they doing, what did they bring to school in terms of not just their materials, but what story did they bring in? What's happening at home? What's happening for a family right now that is impacting their learning? And we also know that a student's feelings and self-perception will also impact how they learn. If they don't believe they can do it, it really doesn't matter what lesson is today. That some of my work is just the encouragement and the teaching of children to believe in themselves, in their own self-efficacy. As an expeditionary learning school principal and a progressive educator, I recognize that students' self-perception, their social and emotional growth, and their growing sense of independence and agency are just as crucial to learning as content-based learning. In fact, they're tightly woven together, and the dilemma comes in when we try to see kids as separate strands, rather than one rich tapestry. Students are most willing to show their strengths in raggedy edges, which I think is the best place for learning to occur, is around the raggedy edges. In a culture of respect, in a culture of compassion, and physical and emotional safety. And I think sometimes in our conversation about evaluation, about accountability, about teachers, about students, we take that piece out of the conversation when I feel that it is intrinsically tied into the conversation. When teachers and students feel safe in their learning environment, both emotionally, academically, professionally, then we actually work at our best. And that's a piece of the conversation that I think needs to come back. At our school, we call ourselves a sanctuary school. It's one in which children and their families and teachers are welcome and respected. When children feel challenged in a safe and kind environment, and I would say even teachers, they think more deeply and critically. They develop self-efficacy and a belief in their own abilities. And they actually believe that they can create a more positive world, that this education has a real-world impact. In our environment, teachers are experts, students are seen for who they are and all their possibilities. And standardized testing becomes one moment in time. Not the defining moment of learning, but just one moment. It's important, but it's not the important moment. Content serves a purpose beyond one moment in time. We would rather see our students demonstrate their learning as historians, writers, mathematicians, scientists, and artists. We would rather see our students, which they do, go to the Santa Fe River, collect data, see what the pH is, who's living in that river, to see if that river is healthy, rather than just read about the pH of a river. Our students actually take that data and they submit it to Riverwatch, which is an organization that monitors the health of the Santa Fe River. So that they see, oh, that learning about chemistry and biology, it has a real world impact. More than just being a scientist, I'm a steward of my planet. Our kids create hiking trails, a hiking trail guide for other students. Ooh, there's my time. I'm sorry. Come talk to me later.
The fifth and final panelist to give an overview is a counselor, Bernice Garcia. Bernice.
I too am going to sit. I'm still tired from yesterday when we went on our evacuation drill in the rain and the hail. And we walked from our school to, we didn't have to go too far, but it was fun moving, 500 plus people in that kind of weather. And I think our kids learned a lot. I know I did. When I was invited to be on this panel, I was very carefully asked if I could provide the counselor's point of view about this subject, and as compared to the union president's point of view that people are used to hearing me talk about. And I said, of course, of course. And when I sat down and I tried to, start thinking about what I would say, honestly, I cannot disconnect the two, because I see working with children as completely connected to the adults that are in their lives. And so, for an example, of course, is that we know that the best kind of education, it's very well established that the best kind of educational programs are those that begin educating a pregnant woman and the parents that are pregnant. And we get them to understand nutrition and help them to understand that there's very simple things they need to do in order to be the best possible teachers of their children. And so we learn from that, we know from that, that whatever is good for the parent is good for the child. Similarly, what is good for the children is also good for the parents. And that transfers over to school. And I don't mean by that, because I don't see parents saying, okay, I need to go take a break from you. I need to go take 5 weeks away from you so that I will be okay tomorrow, so just stay there. And teachers don't feel that way either. It's, we who are in the classroom with kids every day, it's a very challenging experience. If you have 1 or 2 children and you know how difficult it is to manage that, try 20 or more, students. And so that's something that we know has to be done, that the adults have to be cared for, the children have to be cared for. Now let's talk about that caring for the children, because the cart has started to drive the horse in this process we call education. And I look back to when NCLB began, and these changes started coming about. Before that, the worst that I'd had to go through was like dealing with new math. I'm talking back in like 1970 something when I started teaching. It was like new math, and everybody was so weirded out by that. Well then, that when I look back at that, that was the good old days compared to what we've gone through with NCLB, and then with the A through F grading system. Because all of it is so based on evaluate, 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 assess, assess. The teachers at my school are some of the hardest working people that I have ever known. And yet we're labeled as this D school, and we were F not too long ago. D, F, B, C, A, it makes no difference to me because they are false measurements. They completely are. But what they have done, especially the A through F, has labeled in the public's mind, because everybody knows what an A, B, C, D, F is. And so when you look at my school and say, oh, that's a D school, people know, oh, that's not a very good school. They know, quote unquote. And that's not the truth. So we need to really look at how are we using evaluation, how are we using assessments. Don't make people crazy over just doing that all day long. I will tell you, my school is very high, what's the word? I don't want to say energy exactly, but right now we're being told that we really need to focus on getting our scores up. And I can see that there's a lot of discord being sown by that, because we're focusing too much on that rather than on the children. And I think as long as we do that, we're not going to make progress. We have to look at things as Finland has, or if you look at any other good education enterprise. We cannot just have our education system for the purpose of supporting corporate billions. The testing companies and the curriculum companies, that is the entire reason for why NCLB was developed. And it has really had an effect on our schools, but it's not a good effect, especially for those of us who are high poverty schools. Just look at the studies that were discussed earlier, and it's just common sense. You don't even have to look at studies. I have to throw out one time-honored sentence, and that is that we have to get back to basics. And I'm going to show you, I have my little, I did bring my show and tell, and I have to put it out, but I don't know exactly where. But there are two things that we need to concentrate on. I think I can probably talk loudly enough with my teacher voice. So, here's the first
playground voice.
Yeah. The first thing that we do need to think about is, and this has been referred to already in these meetings, and that is the Maslowian model, where, you know, if the kids don't have enough to eat, if kids don't have enough sleep, enough whatever, that's basic. And I'm not going to go over this because most of you are familiar with this, but this is something that I wish more principals were here to see, more other administrators, but that's kind of basic, and we learn that in Education 101. The other thing, I know I'm over my time, I just won't talk at the end, is the other thing has to do with multiple intelligences. All of our kids are geniuses, they really are. But some of them are geniuses. For example, I can't follow directions worth 2 cents. Some of my kids could take us on a tour of New York City if they just looked at a map, you know, one time. There's musical intelligence, there's logical, there's the interpersonal, there's the intrapersonal. These are just some things that Howard Gardner, it's one theory from a long time ago, but if we would educate using this, and if we would assess and evaluate using this, then the value of our schools would return to how it was in the past, which was amazing educators for everybody. And I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to proceed to some questions.
Right. Does anybody else in the audience have additional questions to hand to members of the coalition so we can gather those up? There's some more over here. Good. While we're doing that, the New Mexican especially asked me to ask this group 2 questions. How many of you have children in the public school system?
Children and grandchildren.
Any children? Yes. Children in the school system. Chris, you got it? Okay. And then how many educators do we have in the room? Good. Okay.
Went to law school.
All right, question collectors. Are we ready to deliver those to the moderator?
Give me just a moment to see where we're at here.
Can I use that moment
Yes.
for my other 30 seconds? So I will grab that. I'm back on the yellow now, Elise. As everybody was talking, I thought of one more thing that I had meant to include and as everybody spoke so eloquently and wisely, I thought back to that. And that is the idea that I hope, as we look at how we evaluate children's progress, somehow we are able to instill into our classrooms and into the structures of schools, and most importantly into the spirits and hearts and minds of our students, that to evaluate their academic progress is not to judge their worth as a human being. Because right now, what we're seeing and what I'm experiencing, we have 3 kids, is that often those things are confused. And just because one doesn't read and write well, doesn't mean that one is not worthy as a human being. And so when we're looking at how to evaluate students and their progress, that somehow that conversation, I very much believe in the power of naming, because it's what we feel in our gut, but often goes unnamed. And so I just thank you for all that you said, that it reminded me that was the other thing that I was going to say.
Okay, I have zipped through these questions, and I'm going to do some editing because we can't get to all of them. All of them certainly are thoughtful, but time will not permit us. So I'm going to go to the high-end ones that I think would be the most interesting. Gitya, I'd like to ask this of you, and it has a political overtone to it. How can we change the system from a punitive one where we use our data to develop our talent?
So how do we use our data to develop our talent? I think one of the things that other panelists have talked about through the Finnish model, but through a lot of our panel, is how we actually see the role of the teacher. Teacher, rather than the teacher fix-it model, but to teacher, you are the expert model. And how we train our teachers, how we respect our teachers, how we see our teachers. Because the first point is, and I think that is why many teachers do go to the independent school system often, is the fact that I get to be seen as a talented person in my own right. I am an academician, I am a scholar, and that is what I want to share with other students. And when you have that mindset as a teacher, it's very easy to really go to that Maslowian place. And it's also easier to see kids from a multiple intelligence, multiple learning style point of view. Learning disabilities become learning divergences. They don't become the defining moment for identity. And so I do think the first place to develop our talent in education is to develop the people who are delivering it. You know, to really, it's not incentivizing teaching, but that it is, if there's an intrinsic reward to teaching, and that there should be respect given to that. And when teachers get respected, they start respecting the talents of their students. And I think that's how I would answer that.
The second question that I've chosen is along the same lines. Bernice, I'd like to direct this to you because of your background in two areas. The questioner says, the time to do is now. What can we do right now to get rid of the excessive testing? And then it goes on with a comment that the damage is being done under the current system. So to the point, what can be done now to get rid of what the questioner calls excessive testing?
I think that what can be done now is to ask the experts, and that is those who are teaching now. And the experts will tell you that they have studied for years, and it's not just while they were in college, it's a lifelong study. I remember when I was teaching my classes, I'd be in the shower in the morning and be like, oh, that's gonna be a great thing to do, and you rush out to write it down so you don't forget. It's a 24/7 kind of a process when you're teaching. So teachers are the experts. They've been trained out the gazoo, because PD is the big thing lately, professional development for everybody. Great. They have professional development, they need professional development, but quit throwing tons of things at them and let them develop what they have learned. So the professional development that has gone on all their lives, and maybe in the last 5 years with which they've been inundated, let them really think about it, let them develop it, give them time to use it. They get together, give them time to work together so that as a school, as a district, big, good plans can be made. So that's one thing to start with. The other thing has to do with a bit of politics, with some political. And that is that we have got to get our legislators to turn things around. That's one level of it, because there is not, at our state legislature, and I have worked with them quite a bit, there is a component there that thinks that there is nothing that will change in education, nothing can be better, we don't want to put any more money toward it, and those people really don't need to be in office. So the only thing that we need to do is we need to vote them out. Elections have consequences. And so if anything Santa Fe could do, I mean, we're such a great voting bloc here of people who really do care about children. And we just really need to somehow motivate people to get over to the legislature, well, to vote, first of all, vote the correct way, for children, and that's it, and get that done. The other component to this political is, and this is to all the board members who are here, our school board members, we need to start following the law a little better. And that is, in our state of New Mexico, we have local control. And we can do what the governor has mandated, we can do all those tests and whatnot, but when it comes to actually evaluating our teachers and actually deciding what's good for our kids, local control is at the heart of that. And I will tell you, teachers will back you, parents will back you, the voters will back you. And that's something that we definitely have to do. Thank you.
I'd like to squeeze in one more, Tony. This one for you. It's a little more open-ended, but because you talked about the Nordic approach, you may be the most appropriate. What other educational goals may be as important or more important than academic progress?
Well, I think research is pretty clear that EQ trumps IQ in almost any realm of human endeavor. And by that I mean emotional intelligence trumps cognitive intelligence, and that's been very well defined. So are we testing that? Are we evaluating that? Are you training that? Are we training that? Now, I happen to work in an international baccalaureate school, which I'm very happy about, because we do pay a lot of attention to that. But let me share with you this piece of paper that says the Future Work Skills 2012. This comes from an organization that I have followed for years, the Institute for the Future of the Knowledge Works Foundation, funded by Procter & Gamble, of all people, to stay on the cutting edge of the world of work for the next 10 years. So in 2010, what are the skills necessary for 2020? In 2020, what are the skills necessary for 2030? So are we testing this? Here are the skills necessary for 2020. Sense-making, novel and adaptive thinking, social intelligence, transdisciplinarity, computational thinking, cognitive load management, design mindset, global consciousness and awareness, cross-cultural competence, virtual collaboration. Where does that show up on a standardized test? Why are we doing this? What is the world that our kids are coming into? So the social emotional realm definitely is something that is as valuable as the cognitive intelligence. That's where we need to include all of that.
I think that covered our 10 minutes, Nadine, if you want to proceed.
Thanks, Mylan, and thank you, panelists. Thank you for all of your words of wisdom. So, we've been given much to think about, and as we switch gears here, our two questions that we're going to talk about in small groups are these. What did you hear that was most meaningful to you? So that's our first question in your discussion groups. What did you hear that was most meaningful to you? And these are on your yellow sheets. And then the second question is, what action could we take as a community to support the insights that we have found meaningful? So those are our two questions. We're going to have about 20 minutes. And what I'm going to do some dividing of you into groups. And then some of you may need to rearrange yourselves. But I think this side of the room will be a group. This side of the room, if the back two rows would face each other, the second and third rows would face each other, and if you would join the group behind you. Middle group, if you do the same. Back two rows if you face each other. Middle two rows if you face each other. Curly if you just go join the group. Same thing in this third section. Back two rows, middle two rows, and someone from the front join the back. And then over on the side, if you all would be a group. Okay? And then in your groups, first you're going to talk. What did you hear that was most meaningful to you? And then you have a yellow card. You'll have yellow cards brought to you so that you can write down one action. from your group. Panelists, we'd like you to form a group as well with Mylan and also discuss what you all heard about yourselves that was meaningful to you, and you proposed a lot of actions, so if you can choose one or two that you think would be most significant.
They have social services outside. We don't have those.
discussion, so I encourage you to let as many people in your group as possible to speak.
No, I'm just saying that is not. But right now, money talks. So how do you such that?
What's the reason? Because, you know, take this deal was really hard.
Well, we made that bargain, so we reap what we sow. So we have taught ourselves to those assessments even earlier because of that.
And that's the intent was not to be taught to the assessments, it was to be stipend that she's doing extra work.
We never talked about it. We got so much So anyway,
I love the idea as a statistician. I think that's actually the way to go. If as long as you define your purpose identification so well, what's the point? So if the idea is to accomplish this, and still is completely dependent on something like as long as it's really random samples, you can do it. No reason for it. So I think the standard
there's this consortium the city of New York has sanctioned the data on what they're doing is very, very high. Graduation rates are graduation rates. They don't have the scores. Performance assessment consortium, 30 schools.
But they don't.
What assess this presentation?
They are.
Right? Like I mean,
It wasn't driving the innovation in that company.
they had this one, and then they looked at what they did. They tracked the performance of all of their hires based on the data and their interview scores and their test scores from years past. And then they were successful. And then it decided to change.
No one's arguing about data. They use data to get rid of the polluted data.
So like,
years. So your next question is, what action could be taken to address what you found most meaningful to you? And we'd like each group, if you may come up with more than one action, but for each one to go on one of those chartreuse cards. And we're going to ask for one person out of each group to report on whatever you put on that card. So you've got 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes to come up with at least one action within your group.
I'm actually not
assessment source there in Kentucky.
I think that's
very high confidence school. There's this other tool called the College Readiness Assessment Tool. And it's growing by leaps and bounds because it assesses the skills that are necessary.
I know, yeah. Right.
This is reaching the choir, right? It's about what's out there for the people who are not here, who are coming here, who have no interest in this, who are against it.
That's right. It's authentic.
Because we're not going to just talk to you.
That's typically what progressives do. So,
There's a lot of talk about Pearson, but even Pearson
You have 2 minutes to finish writing down your action. So if you're still conversing, you need to switch gears and determine some actions. 1 action per card. You have 1 minute to record your action.
So your action could be teachers in control. Yeah, yeah. Look at the teachers in here and they come from the top.
Groups, each group needs a spokesperson. Who's your spokesperson? That spokesperson needs to take your yellow card and come up here because we need to report out at this microphone. We can't carry the mic around everywhere. So bring your action card and come and join me, please.
I'll try to say just 1 minute if I say it wrong, okay?
Bring your action card and come and join me. The spokesperson for each group, please come up. Spokesperson for each group, please come up. Spokesperson for each group, please come up. We should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spokespeople up here with me. 1, 2, 3. Panelist table, who's your spokesperson? Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Okay, do I have all of the spokespeople? 1, 2, 3, 4. Is there a group that hasn't sent their spokesperson up yet? Corner group, panelists, would you send your spokesperson over, please?
Well, I'm not sure. That's what struck me.
Which group hasn't set up their spokesperson? Come on up. All right, Doris, would you like to begin for us?
And Doris. So our group had a very lively discussion, and our group had a great lively discussion, and we solved all of the problems. So we thought we should support the politicians that support public education and teachers as part of the common good. And the next would be to get out and somehow encourage people to vote, because our future is with our children and the teachers. And that we should also, this is not part of it, but I think that we should have more respect for the teachers who are in those classrooms all day, and they work really hard.
Thank you. Do you have your card for us? Thank you. Sir.
Well, we didn't solve all the problems. So those of you who are planning to leave early, just hang around. We had quite a discussion of a variety of issues and several actions focused on resources for the schools, both for supplemental needs of kids, like the things that community and schools are doing, the so-called wraparound services and resources, and for the school system itself so that it has more resources for teachers and after-school programs and those kinds of things. One of the actions we talked about was publicizing school needs and school successes more than we currently are. Not school problems. We hear about the school graduation rates, and we hear about the low grades, and we hear about those kinds of things. I think, or we thought, too frequently, we need to address what are the needs in the schools, what can we do about those needs, and what are the successes in the schools that make us feel that, yeah, we can support that, rather than, gee, we have this problem of low grades in schools and low graduation rates, and that's pretty depressing.
Hi everyone. So our group, what resonated, what people took away from are a couple things, but legislative change was what came out of our group, that we've got to have change at that level. Teachers are the experts. We have to talk to them. As far as an action step, we decided we need to be really concrete, that change happens when each of us really reflects on what I can do. Not what someone else can do, but so we wanted to invite everyone here to think about and reflect, because everyone here, there's so many different roles in this room, you know, having to do with education. So if everyone in this room could reflect, think about what concrete thing can I do? Not, you know, a month from now, but soon, like tomorrow, this week. You know, what can I do? Whether it be, you know, register to vote, learn about, you know, talk to a teacher, tell friends about what happened here, something concrete. So if each of you could do that, that would be amazing.
Randy Grillo, Santa Fe High School. Today was my teacher observation. I had no students in my class because they were testing. So, we talked a lot about when there's things that really would seem wrong and that bug us, that we need to, in constructive ways, engage with the school board and the legislature and those that make decisions. And so, for everybody here tonight, there's at least one thing we can do, whether it's to write an article to the newspaper or go to the school board or write to someone in legislature. We often wait until there's a crisis and then we react to it. And really, we should be thinking about it now and doing things now. So.
I missed all the instructions because we were still talking in a group. But I think what I need to say is that our group was very lively. We had some parents that supported the idea of testing because it helped them understand where their children were at and how they could help. And other parents who were feeling like the school wasn't supporting them enough and giving them the information they needed to help their children succeed. So basically what we came up with is that Santa Fe needs to have an education project, something that has a vision, mission, goals, resources, including the participation of everyone, the students, the parents, the staff, district members, colleges, etc. And as for, I'm glad to hear the other political people in the room because we talked about lobbying the legislature, and I said specifically we should lobby for full funding of preschool education. It's not that we're giving up on the people that are already in the system, but help the children that are starting school. And once you get that down, then they won't need to do a lot of testing because we can do one a year or one at the end of high school and it will be perfect. We need to start also educating whole children because that's what they are. They're not little data points. Okay?
Up here, who's going to speak?
So our group had a lot of different opinions, I imagine. And so I will sort of take a first shot at it and then pass it over to my colleague over here. So insights. How do we decouple student progress from poverty? So this issue of income inequality and the things that go along with that, how do we deal with that one? So, you know, pre-K or wraparound services, that sort of thing, it's something definitely to think about because, you know, teachers are the experts, but the kids walk in with what they've got, and how do you help the Maslow's hierarchy in the bottom section of that pyramid so that they can reach up to the self-actualization. As far as activities, creating sanctuary schools where it's safe for kids, safe for exploration, so they feel welcome, so you can get some of that effective nature, the feeling part of education. And then finally, it was already mentioned, but take political action. I'm not going to advise you how to vote though.
And I think the other big takeaway, and I hear it, and it's very heartening to hear it from other groups, is really elevating the profession of teaching in the United States. That it becomes the thing that our kids want to become, that when they say, I want to be a teacher when I grow up, we applaud them. And to really see teacher as expert, teacher as scholar, that if you want to change education, go to the folks who are doing it.
Thank you, thank you, Richard. May I have your cards? Because part of what I want to share with you in our closing remarks, besides thanking all of you so much, is that the Interfaith Coalition, from the first forum, also carefully gathered together everything that anybody wrote down for us, questions, these actions, and we put them in a summary document. And we emailed that document to everyone who participated in that evening, and the New Mexican also published it on their Our Schools webpage within their larger website. And the Interfaith Coalition will do a new action plan for ourselves at the beginning of the new calendar year, and we're going to take all this data and see what, how we can integrate that into our plans and move ahead with that. And there are some other gatherings that are coming up that we wanted to be sure that all of you know about. Joel Boyd, our superintendent of schools, is doing a couple of forums coming up where community members can go and ask him questions and speak with him. Those are taking place on Tuesday, October 27th at Nino Otero School, and also on Wednesday, November 3rd at Gonzales Community School from 6 to 7:30 both those times. And another important community gathering that's coming up is being sponsored by the Birth to Career Collaboration that's headquartered at the Santa Fe Community Foundation. So they're sponsoring an opportunity summit at our convention center on November 18th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And there are flyers about this as you leave this evening. So these are all opportunities for us to continue this kind of dialogue. And the coalition has a third forum on December 3rd, again here at the same time. And our question for that evening is going to be, what does it take for our community to boost student graduation rates? So that will be our third and final forum. So I want to thank you again. I've been asked to ask you, if you have used a pencil, if you could leave it, and we'll recycle it at the next forum. And if you have any index cards left on which you've written questions or action items, to please give those to a coalition member. And once again, we're so grateful that you were all here. Thank you very much. Thank you.